Hayley Mills is now 79 years old, and after a lifetime of keeping many things close to her heart, she has finally decided to open up and speak the truth about some of the most important moments and people in her remarkable life. For decades, fans around the world have wondered what really went on behind the scenes of her most famous films, what her relationships were truly like, and what she really thought about the legendary actress Maureen O'Hara, her co-star in one of Disney's most beloved movies of all time. Now, after all these years, Hayley is ready to talk, and what she has to say is both touching and deeply personal. Hayley Mills came into this world on April 18, 1946, in London, England. She was born into one of the most respected and celebrated families in British theatre and film. Her full name at birth was Hayley Catherine Rose Vivian Mills, a name as grand and theatrical as the family she was born into. Her father was Sir John Mills, a deeply admired actor who was known across Britain and the world for his powerful performances in some of the finest films of his era. He appeared in important productions like Great Expectations and Ryan's Daughter, and he carried himself with a kind of quiet dignity that earned him enormous respect both on and off the screen. Her mother, Mary Hayley Bell, was not simply a famous wife, she was a talented woman in her own right, working as a playwright and novelist, someone who understood storytelling from the inside out. Growing up in a home like that, surrounded every single day by conversations about art, performance, writing, and the creative life, Hayley absorbed all of it like a sponge. She did not need to be pushed toward acting or told that it was something special. She could see it all around her, in the way her father prepared for a role, in the way her mother put words together to create characters and worlds. The discipline, the love for the craft, the deep appreciation for what it means to truly tell a story, all of that was already woven into the fabric of her childhood before she ever stepped in front of a camera. Her entrance into the world of film happened when she was just 12 years old, and it was nothing short of extraordinary. The film was called Tiger Bay, released in 1959, and she appeared in it alongside her father. For a child of that age to step onto a professional film set and deliver the kind of performance that critics and audiences immediately took notice of was remarkable. She brought an emotional depth to her role that simply was not expected from someone so young. There was a naturalness to the way she performed, a genuine quality that could not be taught or rehearsed into existence. People watching her on screen felt that they were watching something real, not a little girl playing at acting, but a genuine performer finding her voice. Her work in Tiger Bay did not go unnoticed. Word traveled, as it always does in the world of entertainment, and eventually it reached the ears and eyes of one of the most important figures in the history of popular culture, Walt Disney himself. Walt watched Hayley on screen and recognized something in her immediately. She had that rare combination of innocence and intelligence, a brightness and a spirit that felt completely natural rather than manufactured. She was exactly the kind of young performer that Disney had always wanted to build his family entertainment around, someone that both children and parents could believe in and root for wholeheartedly. It was not long before she was signed to Walt Disney Studios, and the collaboration that followed would define not just her career, but also a significant chapter of Disney's own history. Her first film for the studio was Pollyanna, released in 1960, and it turned Hayley Mills into a name that was known in households all across the world practically overnight. She played the role of Pollyanna, a young orphan girl who arrives in a small town full of sad, bitter, and closed-off people, and proceeds to transform their lives through nothing but her cheerfulness and her refusal to see the bad side of things. It sounds like a simple story, but in Hayley's hands, it became something genuinely moving. She made audiences believe in that character completely. The response to Pollyanna was overwhelming. Critics praised it, audiences loved it, and the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences recognized Hayley's performance with a special Juvenile Award, making her one of the youngest people ever to receive such recognition from the Academy. It was a remarkable achievement for someone still in their early teenage years, and it set the tone for everything that was to follow. Pollyanna has never truly gone away. Even today, decades after its release, people return to it, introduce it to their children, and find the same warmth and hopefulness in it that audiences found the first time around. If Pollyanna made Hayley Mills a star, then The Parent Trap, released in 1961, made her a legend. The film required her to play not one, but two characters, a pair of identical twin sisters named Susan and Sharon, who had been separated as babies when their parents divorced and who meet entirely by accident at a summer camp. The twins then hatch a plan to get their parents back together. It was a bold and technically demanding concept, especially for the era, and Hayley pulled it off with a skill and a charm that left audiences completely enchanted. She had to be two distinct people, while also making it completely clear why they were the same person deep down, and she did it with such ease that it felt effortless, even though the technical and emotional work involved must have been considerable. The Parent Trap became one of the most beloved family films of its time, and it remains one to this day. It has been remade, referenced, and celebrated across the decades, but many people who have seen both versions still believe the original, with Hayley at its center, is something special that cannot quite be replicated. Her comedic timing in that film was remarkable. Her emotional moments were genuinely touching, and her sheer presence on screen made it impossible to look away. She was still a teenager, and yet she was carrying an entire Hollywood film largely on her own shoulders. Through the rest of the 1960s, Hayley continued to work steadily and successfully for Disney, appearing in a series of films that each found their own audience and added to her growing reputation. In Search of the Castaways came in 1962, Summer Magic followed in 1963, and That Darn Cat arrived in 1965. Each of these films was its own kind of adventure, and each gave Hayley the chance to demonstrate different sides of her personality and her talent. She was funny, she was brave, she was warm, she was resourceful. Disney's Golden Girl, as people had begun to call her, seemed capable of anything. But as she moved through her mid-teens and into her late teens, Hayley began to feel a natural pull towards something more complex, more challenging, more adult. She had been playing versions of the spirited, wholesome young heroine for years, and while she was deeply grateful for everything that had brought her, she knew that she was growing up and that her work needed to grow with her. In 1966, she took a role in a film called The Family Way that was unlike anything she had done before. It was a serious, grown-up story, and her performance in it made clear to anyone paying attention that Hayley Mills was not going to spend the rest of her career playing the same type of character over and over. She had genuine range, and she was not afraid to use it. It was also during the making of The Family Way that something happened which would change the course of her personal life significantly. On the set of that film, 20-year-old Hayley Mills met Roy Bolting, one of Britain's most respected film directors. He was 53 years old at the time, which meant there was a 33-year age gap between them. The relationship that developed attracted enormous public attention, much of it critical and disapproving. People found it difficult to reconcile the image of sweet, innocent Pollyanna with the idea of a romantic relationship between a young woman and a man more than 3 decades her senior. The press had strong opinions, and they were not shy about sharing them. But Hayley herself has spoken about how she experienced that relationship from the inside, which is, of course, the perspective that mattered most. She was drawn to Roy Bolting for reasons that made complete sense to her at the time. He was sophisticated, intellectually stimulating, deeply knowledgeable about the world of film, and he had a quality of presence and confidence that she found compelling. He, in turn, was drawn to her talent, her independence, and her spirit. Whatever the world thought of the age difference, what Hayley experienced was a genuine connection with someone who saw her clearly and who encouraged her development as both an actress and a person. They married in 1971 when Hayley was 25 and Roy was 58. Their life together was creative and interesting in many ways. They lived partly in a fashionable flat in Chelsea, the part of London that had long been associated with artists and writers and people who lived their lives a little differently from the mainstream. They also had a home in the English countryside at a place called Cobstone Windmill in Ibston in Buckinghamshire, a beautiful and unusual property that suited their personalities. Roy entertained friends from the film world, they walked together through the surrounding countryside, and by many accounts they built a life together that had genuine richness to it. But like many marriages, theirs faced pressures and challenges that accumulated over time. The gap in their ages, which had not seemed like an obstacle when they were falling in love, began to make itself felt in practical and personal ways as the years passed. Their priorities began to diverge. The strains on the relationship grew. By 1977, they had made the decision to divorce, ending a marriage that had lasted 6 years. It was a painful chapter to close, but Hayley has always spoken about that period of her life with honesty rather than bitterness. The marriage, however complicated, was real. It was part of who she became. The most lasting legacy of her relationship with Roy Bolton was their son, Crispian Mills, who was born during their marriage. Crispian grew up with 2 artistic, creative parents, and he absorbed that influence deeply. He went on to build a career in music that was entirely his own, becoming the lead singer, guitarist, and main songwriter for a British band called Kula Shaker in the 1990s. The band became well known for blending rock music with influences drawn from Indian music and spirituality, and they became one of the more distinctive voices of the Britpop era. Hayley has spoken warmly and proudly about Crispian's achievements many times over the years. He found his own path, and she has clearly loved watching him walk it. After her marriage to Roy ended, Hayley found companionship with an actor named Lee Lawson. Their relationship developed in the mid-1970s, and in July of 1976, they welcomed a son together, Jason Lawson. The relationship brought Hayley a period of happiness and stability after the difficulties she had been through, and she and Lee shared a genuine mutual respect both personally and professionally. But the demands of 2 busy acting careers, along with the differing directions their lives were taking, eventually put too much pressure on what they had built together. By the early 1980s, they had separated, though they remained respectful of one another and committed to being good parents to their son. Life continued, as it always does, and so did Hayley's career. She worked consistently through the following years, appearing in theater productions, television dramas, and independent films. She never became the kind of star who disappears from view between big projects. She simply kept working, kept growing, kept bringing her talent to whatever role was in front of her. The entertainment industry can be brutal to people who age out of the image they were first celebrated for. But Hayley navigated that transition with a combination of skill and determination that won her ongoing respect from peers and audiences alike.
Then, in 1997, something happened that changed her personal life in a beautiful and lasting way. She was touring in a stage production of The King and I, one of the most famous and beloved musicals in the history of theater. She was playing Anna Leonowens, the English schoolteacher who arrives in Siam to educate the children of the king. The man playing the king alongside her was an actor and writer named Firdaus Bamji. He was 20 years younger than Hayley, which in its own way mirrored the dynamic of her earlier relationship with Roy Bolton, only reversed. But what developed between them was something that has proven over nearly 3 decades now to be deeply genuine and enduring. They fell in love through their shared passion for theater and storytelling. They had found each other in the context of art, through the work they both loved, and that foundation gave their relationship a kind of solidity and meaning that has held firm across the years. Unlike her earlier relationships, which attracted so much public scrutiny and commentary, Hayley and Firdaus have chosen to keep their life together largely private. They do not seek the spotlight when it comes to their personal affairs. They focus on their work, they support each other's projects, and they have built a quiet, loving life together that has continued all the way to the present day. In the year 2000, Walt Disney Studios recognized Hayley's lifetime contribution to the company and to the world of family entertainment by honoring her with the Disney Legends Award. It was a recognition of everything she had brought to some of the most cherished films in Disney's history, and it acknowledged the fact that her work had not simply been successful at the time of its release, but had endured across generations. Children who had watched Pollyanna and The Parent Trap had grown up, had children of their own, and had introduced those same films to a new generation.
Hayley's performances were a living part of the Disney legacy. Over the years, Hayley has also spoken publicly and thoughtfully about the particular challenges that come with being a child performer. She knows those challenges from the inside, having been famous from the age of 12. She has spoken about the importance of maintaining a sense of who you really are when the whole world is projecting an image onto you, when you are being told constantly who people want you to be, rather than given the space to discover who you actually are. These are not abstract ideas for her. They are lessons she learned through her own experience, sometimes the hard way. And that brings us to the subject of Maureen O'Hara and what Hayley Mills has finally chosen to say about working with her. For anyone who loves classic Hollywood cinema, the name Maureen O'Hara carries enormous weight. She was one of the most striking and commanding actresses of her generation, a fiercely independent Irish woman who built a legendary career in Hollywood at a time when women in the industry had to fight for every bit of respect and recognition they received. She starred in some of the most celebrated films of the 1940s and 1950s, working alongside the biggest names in the business and holding her own against all of them. When Hayley Mills was cast in The Parent Trap in 1961, Maureen O'Hara was cast as her on-screen mother. The film required them to develop a believable bond, a sense of warmth and history between a mother and her daughter. And doing that convincingly required them to spend a great deal of time on set. What developed between the 14-year-old British child star and the formidable Irish actress in her 40s was something that Hayley has clearly thought about a great deal over the years. And now, at 79, she has decided to describe it as fully and honestly as she can. Her first impression of Maureen O'Hara, she has said, was of someone who filled a room the moment she entered it. There was something about O'Hara's physical presence, the blazing red hair she was famous for, the upright posture, the directness of her gaze, the richness of her Irish voice, that made her impossible to ignore. She was elegant in a way that did not require any effort or performance. It was simply who she was. For a shy 14-year-old child, even one who had already been famous for several years and who had appeared in a number of successful films, this was someone genuinely awe-inspiring to be around. What Hayley noticed first, she has said, was O'Hara's absolute professionalism. This was not someone who came to a film set to make friends or to have a pleasant experience. She came to work, and she expected everyone around her to do the same. She held high standards for herself, and she held high standards for the people she worked with. She did not treat Hayley differently because she was young. If anything, Hayley has suggested, O'Hara respected young people enough to hold them to the same expectations she held everyone else. There was something almost generous in that, even if it did not feel that way at the time. As the filming progressed and Hayley spent more time around Maureen O'Hara, the initial sense of being somewhat intimidated gave way to something else entirely, genuine admiration and appreciation. She began to see that behind the formidable exterior was a woman who cared deeply about the work, who put enormous thought and feeling into every moment of her performance, and who brought a level of craft and intention to the screen that was genuinely educational to witness. Watching O'Hara work, Hayley has said, was like being in a class taught by someone who had mastered their subject completely. Between takes, O'Hara sometimes took the time to speak with Hayley directly, to offer quiet words of advice and encouragement. She did not make a big show of this. She was not performing generosity. She simply shared things she had learned, things she thought might be useful to a young woman navigating the particular challenges of being both an artist and a public figure from a very young age. One piece of advice that Hayley has remembered across the decades and returned to many times in her own life was this: you have to know who you are before the world tells you who to be. It was a lesson that took time to fully understand, but once understood, it became something foundational. O'Hara also had a side to her that did not always make it into the public image. She was funny. She could tell a story in a way that made an entire film crew stop what they were doing and laugh. She had grown up in Ireland and had adventures on film sets all over the world, and she had a gift for capturing those experiences in a way that was both vivid and entertaining. In moments of tension on set, she was often the one who could release that tension simply by being herself, by allowing her natural humor and warmth to come through. Hayley has spoken about hearing O'Hara's laugh echoing across the set as one of the sounds she still carries with her from that time. O'Hara also spoke sometimes about her friendship with the great American actor John Wayne, with whom she had made several famous films. She had stories about shooting on location in rugged, remote places, about the physicality of those productions, about what it was like to be one of the very few women in those settings who was treated as an absolute equal. These stories gave Hayley a window into a world of Hollywood filmmaking that she had not experienced herself, and they deepened her sense of who this woman was and what she had been through to get where she was. As she has grown older, Hayley has reflected more and more on what it must have been like for Maureen O'Hara to build the career she built during the era in which she built it. Hollywood in the 1940s and 1950s was not a welcoming or fair environment for women. It was dominated by men, controlled by men, and the women who succeeded in it generally had to navigate a great deal of unfairness and disrespect along the way. O'Hara was someone who refused to simply accept that. She pushed back. She demanded to be treated with dignity. She insisted on the kind of professional respect that her male counterparts received without having to ask for it. And because of the way she carried herself and the way she refused to back down, some people misread her. They called her difficult or arrogant, when the truth was that she simply would not accept less than she deserved. Hayley has said that O'Hara showed her, by example rather than by instruction, that it is possible to be both firm and kind at the same time, that you do not have to sacrifice your warmth or your humanity in order to hold your ground, that standing up for yourself and caring about other people are not opposites. This was a lesson that proved enormously valuable to Hayley as she navigated her own career through the years that followed, particularly as she made the transition from beloved child star to adult actress and found herself having to redefine her professional identity in the eyes of both the industry and the public. The friendship that developed between them on the set of The Parent Trap was not the kind that involved constant contact and regular get-togethers over the years that followed. O'Hara was by nature a private person when the cameras were not rolling. She did not thrive on the social aspects of Hollywood life. She did not gossip or involve herself in the kind of theatrical personal drama that was part of the entertainment industry landscape. What she valued, in her personal life as in her professional life, was integrity, and Hayley respected that deeply, even if it meant their friendship remained something quieter and less visible than it might otherwise have been. When Maureen O'Hara passed away in 2015, at the age of 95, Hayley felt the loss in a way that went beyond simply mourning a colleague or a co-star. It felt, she has said, like the loss of something that could not be replaced. O'Hara had represented a particular kind of Hollywood grace and strength, a way of being in the world that belonged to a specific time and a specific generation, and that is simply not replicated today. With her passing went something irreplaceable, a connection to an era of filmmaking that shaped everything that came after it. When Hayley watches The Parent Trap now, all these decades later, she says she sees Maureen O'Hara's face and finds herself remembering the small, specific details, the reassuring smile that O'Hara would offer just before a particularly difficult scene, the hand placed quietly on Hayley's shoulder, accompanied by the simple words, "You've got this, darling." These small moments of human connection between a seasoned professional and the young actress who was learning from her are the things that have stayed with Hayley most vividly. Not the grand gestures or the memorable lines, but the quiet, real moments of one person helping another. She was not just a co-star, Hayley has said, when she summed up what Maureen O'Hara meant to her. She was a mentor. She was someone who looked out for a young woman who was still finding her way and who offered guidance and protection without making a performance of it. She was a friend, in the real sense of that word, which means someone who tells you the truth, holds you to high standards, and believes in what you are capable of, even when you are not entirely sure yourself. Working with her, Hayley has said, was one of the greatest gifts of her entire career,
And that is a remarkable thing to say when you consider the scale and richness of the career she is describing. At 89, Hayley Mills looks back on a life that has been full of every kind of experience: extraordinary professional success from a very young age, public scrutiny and attention that began before she was old enough to fully understand it, complex personal relationships that brought her both joy and pain, the experience of motherhood, and the particular pride of watching her children build their own lives and find their own voices. She has weathered all of it with a resilience and a grace that seems, at least in part, to have been shaped by the people she was lucky enough to work alongside in those early years, people like Maureen O'Hara, who showed her by living example what it looks like to hold your ground with dignity, to care about your craft with everything you have, and to treat other people with genuine warmth even when the world is not always offering you the same in return. That, perhaps, is the real truth that Hayley Mills wanted to tell. Not a scandal, not a shocking revelation, but something quieter and more lasting. The truth that the moments that shape us most deeply are often the ones that happen between the big scenes, in the quiet spaces where one person turns to another and offers something real: a smile before a hard moment, a hand on the shoulder, words that take years to fully understand, but that you carry with you for the rest of your life.